So Ephesians 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you, and you may live long on the earth. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Okay, so children, obey your parents in the Lord. The original word for children, is that just talking about when people are still underage? Or is that just talking about if you are a child of a parent? For example, I am an adult right now. So is that indicating that I still need to obey you or not? I'm just curious.
I think it's children, or little children. It's probably the word teknon. I'm not sure if that's the word used here or not. But probably is. Let me check here. Or it could be teknion, which is a different word. Let me see here. Let's go to the King James Version. The word for children is teknon. It's an offspring, a child, a male child. Metaphorically, the name transfers to intimate, reciprocal, and affection. Yeah, it's the basic word for child. And what it's talking about is the fact that there is a order in the family, and that children should be obeying their parents. It's not talking about grown children; it's talking about children at home. Mm-hmm. Now, whether they should afterwards isn't even in this. It's just saying that children. Mm-hmm. In other words, there's children, there's parents, and the parents are the ones that lead, not the children. Mm-hmm. Unlike today.
And then it talks about honor your father and mother. Mm-hmm. So what all is included in that word honor?
Respect. Respect your children. Give honor to whom honor is due, to the king. And the honor of a king is different than the honor of, give the respect that's due to their position. Your parents are worthy of honor because they've raised you and they've taken care of you, and so you show respect for them.
And how far should an underage person go as far as if the parent tells you to do something illegal or immoral, then obviously you're not to do that. And that's not dishonoring them. That's just following God's law.
Right.
And so it says, honor your father and mother so that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Yeah. So it may be well with you as in emotionally or physically or what?
It just means it's saying that if you put God first and therefore honor your parents, as it says in the Ten Commandments, then you will, it's not a promise as much as it is a statement of fact, that if you dishonor your parents, it's not going to go well with you, because when you get to be a parent, your kids are going to respect you, and so it's just a statement of, if you do A, B will follow, type of thing.
And then it says,
not necessarily, but mm-hmm. Generally speaking.
Generally speaking.
Just like it says when he says, all government is ordained of God. That does not mean that God chose Hitler or put Hitler in place. It's saying that the purpose of government, and so it's taken for granted that it's a good government.
Because it says, so that you may live long on the earth. So what does it mean to live long?
Live long.
Because mom honored her parents. And yet,
again, it's not a promise. People confuse, like when you do the work of Proverbs. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, you not depart from it. That's not a promise. That's a proverb which says this is the norm. There will be exceptions to the norm for whatever reasons, but it's as if you honor your parents, you are very much more likely to live long on the earth. But there's cases when that won't be true for other reasons, because it's But we often take Proverbs and think they're promises, and they're not. They are statements of truth, a truism. And especially the Proverbs that people do that. Another way of translating that is allow a child to grow up the way he wants, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's a truism that it's the early years where they're taught. But the individuals, there's always an individual thing in that. You can have you can do all you can to train someone, but if in their heart they don't want to, the point is you do what you would, and the chances are going to be high that it will turn out right. You do what's wrong, the chances are high that it's too late when he gets old to change it.
Mm-hmm. And then it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. So what does it mean to provoke the children to wrath?
I think personally that means that you should not be disproportionate. If you're unfair in your discipline, like someone, a little child, 3 years old, accidentally knocks something over and you spank them for it. They didn't mean to do it. They weren't disobeying you. They weren't running in the house when you told them not to. It's just they didn't see something and it got knocked over, and you spanked them for it, and you were consistently doing this. You're going to provoke them to anger because they know it's not fair. What you're doing is not right, and so fathers are to be they are to discipline their children consistently. Or if you treat one child different than you do another child, like Jacob and Esau. One had the mother had one favorite and the father had another. That was not doing it the way it should be.
And it says to bring the children up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So admonition, what is that original word for admonition?
Yeah. Okay. This translation is the nurture. The word is paideia. The whole training and education of a child. Okay. It's admonishing, reproving, but that's the negative side of it. There's the positive side of it too. Good example, that kind of stuff. So, admonition of the Lord is the combination of training them, always remembering that you have a Father in heaven, and they're going to listen more to what you are going to. They're going to do what you do, not what you say. And and the admonition, training them up. The idea is to train them up. Yeah.
All right. So the next piece. I believe it's verse 4 starts with bondservants. Be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, and sincerity of heart, as to Christ, not with eye service. Is that what comes next?
As men pleasers.
Yeah, I'm just saying, is that the next piece? Okay. So not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of the Lord, of Christ. Of bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with goodwill, doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. All right. So the word bondservants, what is that in the original?
Doulos.
Which means what?
Servant, slave.
Okay. So someone who has to do what the other person says.
They say bond servant.
Mm-hmm.
It was a slave. That's all they had in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Were slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But they're trying to make it more modern. A bond servant was someone who was really a slave. It's a euphemism for a slave.
Mm-hmm. But that still applies to us today as well.
Yeah.
We don't call ourselves slaves.
It's
but,
really saying the servant and the master.
Mm-hmm.
The master has the right to tell the servant what to do.
So basically,
Well,
my
the
boss has the
employer
right to tell
and
me
the
what to
employee.
do. Yeah. As long as it's not against the law, unethical, against God's word, etc.
But see, in those days, it was slaves, and it said and there were a lot of slaves in the church. They said, "Now you slaves, just because you are a child of the king, doesn't mean that in your life, in your flesh, it says, in your life, that you're still under the authority of that boss." And so, and to do it not as a man pleaser, but as God. In other words, he says, remember, you have a master in heaven. Mm-hmm. And so, even though you may be a servant, you don't disobey your master any more than you should disobey God, mm-hmm. because that's your boss. In our case, that's the one that pays you. Mm-hmm. And so you give them a full day's, they say a full day's work for a full day's pay. Mm-hmm. In other words, be honest, mm-hmm. and above board. You go to Walmart and you see these two workers that are out there chatting and ignoring the people. They're not being good servants.
So it says with fear and trembling. So what does it mean that you're supposed to do it with fear and trembling?
Really, when it comes, it's like where Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, knowing therefore the fear of the Lord, we persuade men. And he's just got through saying, for we shall all one day stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade men. He's saying, in other words, there's coming a day in which we will give account for everything we do.
So it's not fear as in to be afraid, it's just a healthy respect.
It's like Paul says in Philippians, Paul says, I do not want to be ashamed when I stand before Christ. He's talking about he's going to go before Caesar. And what he's afraid of is that he may be intimidated and fail to present Christ, to get off light or whatever. He says, I do not want to be ashamed when I stand before Christ. I want what I do in this life, I know reflects on Christ. And one day when I stand before Christ, fear in the sense of I do not want to fear, with fear and trembling is the idea of I know there's coming a day in which I will give account. That's what it's talking about. Mm-hmm. It's not a terror that I'm afraid. He says that the point is, if you're doing what's right, like he says in Romans, he says, for the king is not a terror to him who does right. Well, Hitler was a terror, but it wasn't talking about Hitler. It was talking about this is the way God ordained it. If you do what's right, then you'll receive what's right. And in God's economy, that's true. But don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but be afraid of him who can cast you into fire and kill both the body and the soul. In other words, it's not a fear that this is going to happen, but a fear of not wanting to go there. It's the fear of saying, I know there's going to be a punishment for sin. And so I do not want to sin because I fear what will happen if I do sin. But it's not a fear of God. It's a fear of just punishment. Mm-hmm. And there's where it comes down today. People aren't afraid of just punishment because they figure they get away with it.
Mm-hmm. And then let's see, what was the next piece? The next one after that is masters, and you masters?
And you masters.
Okay, and you masters.
Wait a minute.
No, did I skip a part?
Yeah, that's it. And you masters.
Okay, and you masters do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him.
Right.
So it's basically saying, masters, you're not off the hook either. Your servants are to God. Therefore, you also need to treat these people respectfully.
And what he's saying is, what in the workplace is very similar to what's in the family. Parents children obey your parents in the Lord. Servants obey your masters in the Lord. Parents, fathers, do not be so unjust in your actions that that your children will be lost because of your unfairness. Masters, don't be so threatening to your people that you lose them, because you're gonna stand accountable for the way you treat your employees. And employers will one day stand before God and have to give an account. He said, for the one who holds back the laborer's things will not be countless before God. He will judge them for it. So it's really saying is, in all that you do, realize there's coming accounting day for you. And so do what you should right now, because someday you'll stand before God.